Hello everyone, I am George R. Powell, the music composer for Eve of October. Well, while I may be 90% Welsh from both sides of my family, I can't honestly say I've ever been to Wales. I am definitely a born American. I was born and raised in the small town of Holiday, Florida. It's around the Tampa Bay area. And that's where I grew up and where a lot of my music started. Now, musically, I actually started taking piano lessons at age 4 and was raised in classical music and trained in music theory for piano. I was never actually formally trained in orchestration. That actually came with my passion as it developed over the years as I got older. When I was 15 years old, I started playing video game music that or I had already been playing video game music on the piano that I arranged myself because I liked playing it. And as time progressed, I kind of grew and evolved into actually desiring to compose my own music. And at the time, I was only doing piano pieces. It wasn't until I actually started making my own video games in 1998 that I actually started to look into learning how to layer instruments to create kind of piano string duets is where I started, and kind of built from there. Drew on a lot of what I heard from other soundtracks at the time, but that's pretty much how I musically started out. I've always been in love with film scores. As a matter of fact, my mother used to always tell me about how when I was a little baby in the crib, I used to dance back and forth to the Star Wars Empire theme. But so yeah, it's probably safe to say that music's been in my blood since the very beginning. Pretty much that's where I started, that's where I came from, and as time progressed, I met new people who trained me in studio hardware and software, and from there I just kind of went on a self-study of orchestration, where I pretty much just did as much research as possible and got as much practice as possible, and I was doing pretty well when I actually scored the Hero of Time film in 2007 through 2009 by B&B Finishes. That actually was my first feature-length film score. And Eve of October I actually found through the Anime Studio community. I have Anime Studio myself, and I was just checking through the Share Your Work, and I came across Mars's submission of the Eve of October footage, and I saw it, and I was like, this is amazing. I mean, I've seen other people's videos, and not saying that their videos were bad, but there was just a very professional caliber going on there. And I noticed that it was missing sound design and music, and I made a comment actually on Mars's YouTube channel about how it really needs sound design and music, and then he says he immediately checked out my profile and found out that I was actually a composer, and so he actually had me audition for it, and lo and behold, I mean, here we are. We have a complete first episode with a complete score. Well, you see, here's the funny thing about that. When I first was getting ready to start composing music for Eve of October, Mars had actually told me, because I had sent him some of the pieces that I did for Hero of Time and other projects, and I tend to shoot for a very magical, very lush and rich sound, and Mars had said, I don't want something epic. I want something that is gonna be dark and tribal, but still kind of keep a good adventure atmosphere, and I ended up starting out that way, and then thinking to myself, doing the music, and just happened to come out with the usual sound that I normally compose. And I listened back to it with the footage and thought, you know what, this music actually sounds kind of good, and Mars is probably going to hate it because it's not exactly what he originally asked for, but you know what, I'm just going to send it to him anyway and see what happens. And sure enough, Mars heard it, and he evidently was blown away by it, by the kind of responses that I got. And he decided to just go with it, and Mars has actually given me more creative freedom than any director I've ever worked for in my entire life, which I remember in the earlier parts of our working together, I told him, you know, you need to like crack down on me and tell me when you don't want me to do something a certain way, because you know, I need to make sure that I musically portray what you want the viewers to see in the project. But Mars was confident that I knew what I was doing, which I always said that makes one of us. But yeah, then I just kind of kept on going, tried to implement a little bit of the sound while keeping it within my own style. And to be honest, I really stepped out of my comfort zone on this because I have not really composed this kind of sound before. And it was really challenging for me, but it was a challenge that I worked through. I was confident that I would be able to work through it, and I personally am very proud of the results. Honestly, that's a hard one because there were a lot of scenes that I really enjoyed scoring. If I had to point one out, I would definitely have to say the Mikel Descends scene where she begins the invasion against the Council's wishes. Because when she actually comes down with all the gunships and the soldiers, when I first watched through the videos, before I even started on a single cue, I saw that scene and I was like, you know what? I know exactly what I want to do with that. And I actually spent quite a bit of the score just waiting until I got to that scene. Just couldn't wait to get to that scene because I knew what I wanted to do there, and I knew it was going to sound just like awesome. It was just going to work. And oddly enough, it's probably one of the shorter pieces of the soundtrack too, but that had to honestly be my favorite. But another favorite of mine would be Haley's theme, which can be heard not only when he's talking to Eve the first time he encounters her, but also later when he's telling Jake the story about his past. That theme actually has been in my head for quite a few years now, and I never actually used it for any production. And when I watched those scenes, I immediately thought, you know, this theme, I've been holding on to it for so long, never really used it for anything. Why don't I try it out here? Because I would love to hear it being played with like a pan flute, and then I gave it a shot, and it ended up working seamlessly. Haley's actually has to have probably my favorite theme next to the theme I established for the Balor, which can be heard when Eve is talking to Freya within her dream about the dead trying to claim her. That was another theme that I actually liked because I was able to give it kind of like a royal sound. And I know I totally sound like I'm full of myself, but believe me when I say I'm proud of my work, but I do not let it go to my head. All around, that would... I'm not exactly sure I know how to answer that question without saying that what I usually try to do, because every composer does things slightly differently, what I try to do is I try to establish an emotional atmosphere musically. It probably comes from when I first started scoring games, before I started scoring film. The whole point of composing for games was to set a mood, and it didn't matter how long the piece was or whether or not the music had to interact with anything happening, whereas when you're scoring for screen, it's different because the music does kind of have to interact with the footage. And when I was listening to the dialogue would give away a lot of what was going on, obviously, but would also give away kind of a mood, especially with Kieran voicing Haley's. Like when he would tell his story to Jake, he had a very somber tone, and I knew then, I mean, beside it being common sense because it's a sad story, I had to make sure that the music had just the right texture to match his sadness in telling this tale, which is why I used the sordino or muted strings to kind of mellow out the texture. But all in all, I was pretty much just trying to establish a mood, keep the mood going, keep it pulsing, and keep it true to the emotional environment that was being conveyed visually and vocally through the actors. Well, you see, I want to say my favorite character's Haley's, but I guess I have to get in line because I think everybody else pretty much feels the same way. I mean, you have Eve, the protagonist, who's driven, has plenty of motivation, you know, nothing at all missing from her character, and Laura did do actually a very good job voicing her and giving her kind of life in her dialogue, and she did the same with Freya and Mikel as well. And I have to admit, she also did a very good Mikel. But Haley's would be my favorite character because when I watched it, I thought, Haley's is supposed to be the character that is cool. He's smooth, he's got the moves, the skills. He's the one that is designed for everyone, to all the kids who watch this, to kind of look up to. Because a lot of fantasy productions, especially adventure movies, usually have at least one character that's like that you're supposed to look up to and think they're cool. And that would definitely be Haley's. And I have to say, again, props to Kieran, who really did a good job of making Haley's pretty much jump out of the screen and come across as a real character instead of just a graphic that talks. But that, and there's something about people with pointy ears that I just think is pretty cool too. But that one's on Mars. For the most part, I'm a very big John Williams fan. I think most composers or musicians are. I'm a big fan of James Newton Howard, Howard Shore, and here's where my geek is going to set in. I actually draw a lot of my inspiration from Japanese composers, like Nobuo Uematsu, the Final Fantasy composer, Noriyuki Iwadare, who did the Grandia, I believe the whole series. He did Lunar, Silver Star Story Complete, some of the Tales games. He's done a lot. And who can forget Yoko Kanno and Hajime Mizoguchi, the composers of Escaflowne, which is my #1 all-time favorite anime. Even though I've seen other anime that I like, that one still remains at the top of my list and probably always will. And as far as my favorite soundtracks, I have lots of them that I love listening back to. And the Escaflowne movie soundtrack, not to diss the series at all, but the movie soundtrack of Escaflowne actually is one that I can come back to every so often and still enjoy it all over again, because as far as I'm concerned, as great as the Escaflowne film was, the soundtrack really kind of sold it, in my opinion. But between that, there's the Lady in the Water soundtrack by James Newton Howard, and even the King Kong soundtrack that James Newton Howard did, that I can go back and listen to periodically for inspiration. But for the most part, Japanese music actually, or Japanese composers actually were my first inspirations in composing, and even to this day, long after I kind of grew out of anime, you can still hear a lot of that in my music. You can hear a lot of that inspiration from anime and game soundtracks. Well, at this time, I am currently a major in business administration. I'm in a 4-year bachelor program for that, and I'm minoring in marketing, and what I plan to do once I'm out of school is to open up an animation studio, Wingspread Multimedia. I use multimedia because I plan to stretch into more than just film, but that's where my passion lies, is in animated film, which is actually what led me to Anime Studio and then consequently Mars. And I plan to produce my own animated adventure films in time. Then for now, and for immediate plans for the future, I believe I am signed on for Eve of October's OVAs 2 and 3. So that's going to be quite the adventure. And I'm pretty sure by now, if anyone has started a drinking game on every time I've said or then you're probably passed out with alcohol poisoning as of this moment. I promise I'm not Jeff Goldblum, and I thank you very much for this interview. It's been a pleasure and an honor to work with you, Mars, and I look forward to the adventures that we're going to have in the future.